Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and a very happy new year to everyone as we begin 2022. I'm going to approach things a little bit differently here than I normally do, and I'm going to make a forecast at the very beginning right now that's going to surprise quite a few people, and I hope you'll hang on long enough to find out why I'm saying it. This February, I will mark 18 years since I first set foot here in Panama, and to make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to live here. I spent almost my whole adult life visiting, working in, living in countries all over the world, more than 40 of them. And I knew what I wanted, and I found it here. And I made the decision, actually within 36 hours of arrival, if you can believe that. But I mean, I'm an analyst. I've been through this many, many, many times before, and I had my checklist in my head. Didn't even know it was there until I suddenly realized I did have it, and bam, 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 went down the list, and it worked. I was very pleased with what I saw. So I made that decision that I would come in that short period, and I have never regretted it for an hour or 5 minutes since then in all these years. So it is that I've been through good times and bad times here, and we certainly have been through a very difficult time, not just in Panama, but in the world. But in all those 18 years, I don't believe that I have seen a better year for Panama than the one we just went through in 2021. Now, I know that is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, or at least sound ridiculous and silly. And what do you mean, the best year for Panama? And I'm not referring, of course, to the people we lost. I lost a very good friend and had others who got very ill, were hospitalized, and came too close, but not quite, but made it. Listen, got out of it, thank God. So I'm not talking about that. Those are horrible things that happened, and I just, that's nothing to praise about that. And I'm not talking about restrictions. I don't like them. I dislike masks as much as anybody. And yet, just like everyone else here, when I get up and I walk out the door, I put on my mask, because we're still doing that, and we will continue to until it's decided that we don't have to anymore. This nation has not politicized the issue. We're looking at it as a health issue. We are happy with what we've done. We have good results to show for what we've done, and we're sticking with it. So we're doing it as a group. And although there's many of us who feel as strongly as I do, if not more so, on issues like masks and so forth, we have more important things to deal with. And that's really what it boils down to. People can't waste their time on this. We have other things we want to deal with, and we will deal with them, and we're in the process of it, and that's good. That's a very good thing. I'm talking about things like corruption, for example, and about the minimum wage, and about the financing of the Social Security system. These are really major issues at the moment, and all of them being dealt with. We see a lot of action being taken in corruption. I mean, my gosh, we've had people put in jail that 5-10 years ago would never have seen the inside of a jail cell. We are now seeing fines levied that are huge. They're really big. There's a lot going on. And we can criticize and wonder and so forth, all our little heart's desire here. Truth of the matter is, the public here is fed up with it, and it is beginning to change. It is something I have seen happen in other nations, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. I think it's going to be successful here. I hope so. But it's something that the people themselves decide how it's going to unfold, and it unfolds. But it's underway. And so masks, who cares? That's not the issue that we need to deal with in our lives here today. And as far as business is concerned, I have nothing but sympathy for people in business who've had to suffer from the lack of business and from the lockdown and everything else that went on. I own a business. I don't talk about it much here. This is not a commercial YouTube channel. I don't advertise my business. I don't try to sell you anything. But I do, and I have been, and I've taken on quite an amazing task of trying to introduce a new section of Panama to development. And it's really an uphill struggle. It always has been for good reason. And I'm really pleased with what I've chosen solidly behind it. And bam, I can't even show it to anybody. I can't talk to anybody about it because they can't come down. And it's just the way it is. So my business has been zero for some time now, and yet expenses keep on going and everything else. So you're not looking at somebody who is unaware of the impact on business. It's had a major impact on me. But I still understand why. and I'm still in it, and I still intend to remain in it for time to come. Now, all of this may be true, so how can I say that 2021 has been such a good year? And it's in great part because of everything I've just talked about, really, and many other things as well. I'm going to start talking about things that have happened in the past. I'm going to go through them quickly. Initially, when I was thinking about it, I could go on for an hour on each one. I'm not going to do that. But I want to talk to you about a special thing, how I see these 18 years. And when I first came down, they were still talking about the collapse of the stock market in the United States, which had affected stock markets all over the world. It wasn't very little impact down here, except for among the wealthier people who had put their money into stocks in New York. But otherwise, as for the country itself, it had very little impact. It did not. It was not a major concern. But shortly thereafter, we started to have this big growth in the number of Americans, and when the Canadian dollar was strong, the loonie, when it was strong, Canadians as well, coming down and purchasing homes here, that really set the real estate market off and sailing high, just as it was doing the same in the U.S. And one of the problems with North Americans is, especially American citizens themselves, is they tend to think that somehow Panama is tied to the U.S., and so whatever the U.S. happens, it's going to happen in Panama. Yeah? So they worry about these things, and they don't have to. And here was a good example of it, because finally in 2008, we could see it happening. The statistics were all there, and in 2009 and so forth, we had the great bursting of the real estate bubble in the U.S. It's just an astonishing thing to have happen. Trillions of dollars in real estate value were lost. And nations, not just the U.S., but other nations as well, Spain, which is another nation with a long history with this country, had a terrible situation too. And yet, so people were convinced it was going to happen down here, just convinced it was, and it didn't. And our market remained fairly stable. The only areas that were really seriously negatively affected were those far from the city, typically far out west, who were dependent on retirees coming down from North America, because that's not where the business center is, and business people, with the larger portion of our expat community, couldn't live out there. So that turned out to be unfortunate for them. And I saw a confidential survey taken of people involved with the real estate, both the buyers and sellers in that area, and I've never broken that confidence all these years. I'm not going to start, but it was very interesting because the people there, the expats who had already come down, were looking for way more money than the expats coming down were willing to pay, and the imbalance was so obvious, and it was a mess out there. But otherwise, had very little impact, and the city actually stabilized, and in some areas grew, which came as a big surprise to a lot of people. Then, right shortly following that, we had the 2009 really blew up, and particularly in the spring of that year, the global financial crisis, and with it another stock market plummet, as well as all sorts of programs designed to try to deal with this incredible financial crisis that was being felt everywhere, and in the U.S. and in Europe, and bank systems were being bailed out, corporations were being bailed out. There was a lot of talk about how are we going to save our businesses, how are we going to save our banks. Huge sums of money were passing hands to keep things rolling. Again, as is always the case when anything goes wrong up north, or in either Europe or North America, but when both, it's bound to hurt Panama too. So everyone expected the same down here. Even those of us who live down here and should know better, all right? But the government said, okay, they put together a fund, a very substantial sum of money, and went to the banking sector and said, hey, if you're going to need these funds in order to prevent a run on the banks, or to prevent any panic or chaos or anything else, they're available for you. You can borrow them from us and repay at an extremely low rate of interest just for covering our expenses. Just let us know what you need and when you need it. And the response from the banking community as a group was, we don't need it, we don't want it. And that was that. As for corporations getting bailed out, we don't do that. Okay, so the taxpayer here didn't have to bail anybody out. That's a little different than what was going on in other countries, all right? So once again, it hadn't worked out quite the way people thought it would for us. So it is that time after time, and there are many other instances, smaller instances where this has come on to, been very apparent to me. There's this sense that we are sort of helpless and that we can't do anything, and oh, we're going to have terrible problems from this and that and blah, 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 because other countries are. Folks, don't worry about us. I've said it over and over again. Worry about your own nation. Don't worry about us. We've come through well. Now let's look at what happened in 2020. The bottom fell of the economy here. We came down like a ton of brick to prevent the spread of the virus. We had been one of the first nations, along with Chile, to buy, or at least to make orders for Pfizer and whatever we needed to get through the vaccination programs. But we were among the last to actually get any brought in, which was very aggravating. And when it came, they came in very small quantities, but that was in the beginning. Finally, it did start to get in later in 2020 or mid-2020. And I've never seen Panama's system, the health system here, ever respond to anything, or the government, as efficiently as they did in this case. It was astonishing. They divided the medical personnel into 4 groups of 100 each, doctors and nurses. They spread out around the country. Everybody was organized. Everything was signed up in advance. For those, if you had internet access, which the majority of the population does, you can go right in and sign up. I did that. I'm a resident. I get the same treatment as any citizen. So I had signed up there. It worked very smoothly. They notified me when it was time for me to show up for my shot. They told me how to get there and everything else, which really wasn't necessary, but I was very appreciative of the effort. For those who didn't have the internet access, a small army of people went out basically door to door to find them and to set things up and let them know. It was amazing, and I was so proud. We did it so well organized, and people really wanted it, and it happened. So we went from being in very poor shape from that viewpoint to being in very good shape in a relatively short period of time. Our stats went straight up. So it worked, and we have really dug our heels in. Sometimes countries in the region, they opened up early because their businesses were suffering, and they needed the money. We were able to provide support, not in the way of subsidies or whatever, to businesses, but to the people who were most vulnerable here, the vulnerable population. Terrific support for them that other countries couldn't afford. And so they, in their need for that money, opened up their borders to people, in some instances, without any indication of whether they were vaccinated or not, or even tested. And oh my God, countries that had good results up until that point suddenly were swamped with patients. It has been a living and learning experience for everybody in the region, but we were fortunate enough, and I want to leave it at that. A lot of work went into this, a terrific amount of planning went into it, but the basic all is that we have a solid economy. As I've said again and again, we are a business nation, and we looked at this in that light, but we're a loving nation too, and we take care of our elderly, and we take care of those who are unfortunate and less money, and those who have been thrown out of jobs and don't have incomes. We do what we can. And it came together very well. We've come out of it quite well, but the announcement at the end of 2020 was that the Panamanian gross domestic product, this is the total amount of money we earn as income in a year, so to speak, that had fallen by basically 18%, 17.9, but who cares, 18% in a single year. That was the worst record. It was awful. That was just a terrible tragedy. And so we looked at 2021 and we thought, what's going to happen now? The initial idea was we gain maybe 4 or 5%. And as I've mentioned in other videos before, we'll run right straight through it. First, we came up with, the government came up with 4 or 5%. The critics of the government said 3, the supporters said 6, this sort of stuff. Then 8% from the Economist Intelligence Unit of the Economist magazine in Britain, which is known for lowballing it, for for underassuming how much our GDP is, said 8%. Well, we just thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. And then the World Bank came out with 9.9%, which is amusing. It should have been 10, but that's all right, 9.9. I mean, it was way more than we had anticipated, about two to three times more than we were talking about just weeks prior to that. And then finally out came the International Monetary Fund with 12%, and which is now 3 to 4 times what had been predicted as the year started. And that just blew people away. All right, that year's over, so I don't have to make any predictions for that one. However, the GDP is only done for the first 3 quarters. It will be later in February by the time the final quarter, October, November, December, that is finished there and the whole thing put together for the full annual GDP report. But in the first 9 months, we've been growing 14.9, call it 15%, above where we had been the year before. That's a much, much better response than even the International Monetary Fund had been talking about. So I sat down and with the statistics, I pulled the GDP statistics for 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 to the end of the third quarter. And I looked at the fourth quarters, and I said, all right, I made 3 estimates. I gave a estimate where, unlike everything else that had gone on this year in the first 3 quarters, the fourth quarter, we would have a slowdown in the growth. That's why I reduced the amount that it would normally, you might think, if it were following a particular pattern, that it was going to be. And then I put in an amount roughly similar to last year, but with a small, very small increase. And then thirdly, the more positive one, where it wasn't a massive increase, but it was significant, and you could see an increase. It was still in the single digits. And then I put it in to the total as a whole, and the results ranged from 13.7 to 16.5% for last year. In other words, I'm not predicting any longer. I'm just looking at what happened. And I know the October numbers for a different but simpler version of the GDP have come out and shown in October 15.5% increase. I mean, just these numbers were so unexpected. So I look at it and I think, I don't know. And I won't know until we all know. But I'm not going to sit around and wait for 2 months and worry about it. I'd say we were pretty much sure to get a 14%, and we could do better than that. But the important point is that we have grown. Now the first predictions are coming out, and the very first one to come out at the very end of the year from the Economic Commission on Latin America and Caribbean is for 8.2% this year, which would be still extremely good considering we're now comparing ourselves to higher totals, and being by far and away the first in the region. When I say the region, I mean from Canada down to Chile. I mean North America and South America, the Western Hemisphere. So we have nothing to be ashamed of here. If this goes on as they suggest, and we'll see, we don't know, it's a guess in the future, but if anything close to that, we'll get to where we were before the COVID attack, so to speak, before COVID, and start growing again, beyond, and getting back to where we were and beyond. And to do that, if we can do that in a sort of period of time as this, it's astonishing. It will be. But one thing's for sure, we're coming out of this a lot better than we went into it. We now have all sorts of systems operate here better than they did before because they had to. And issues of importance to the community as a whole, the corruption issue being one of them, but only one of many, they were put aside as we all knuckled down and did what we had to do to get this past this virus. A virus is a virus. Viruses have been around for a long time. Panamanians are used to them. They're used to vaccination campaigns, and there's no politics involved. They just took care of it. And here we are. We've come through that, and we've now got people coming in, and we have just announced that Omicron, whereas it's here and it is growing, and we're keeping a very careful eye on it, we do not anticipate any closures or any major changes in mobility within the country or people coming in at this point, because the health system has been so strengthened that it's ready to deal with increased cases if that's what we get. And we're hoping that this will be as it has been in some countries where it's a fairly low-key affair and does not bring the important thing is that the health system is not brought to the breaking point. We cannot handle that. And we have already a long list of surgeries that had to wait because they weren't death dealing, and until the bulk of the COVID problem was out of the way, and then they're slowly beginning to work their way through that backlog, and we do not need another growth in hospitalizations. So we'll see. We'll know more. I'm not going to sit around and worry about it. We aren't sitting around and worry about it. So we're open. People are coming down. We do wear masks. Just get used to it. But we're definitely active, and we don't when we're eating at restaurants and things of this sort. We're logical about it. But in any event, the key point is this: we're in great shape. We've come through it very well, and I say it's an excellent year because we were tested, and once again, we did it. Now, I have been, for 18 years, I've been watching this whole thing unfold. And time after time after time, I've always hedged, and I've always worried that maybe this time things won't go well and so forth and what have you. And I don't want to mislead people, and I sincerely don't want to today. But I'm talking about what is over and done with now, too. That's 90% of what I'm saying. And the 10%, there's no 10%. I'm not saying it's what it's going to be next year. I'm saying it's one of the best years, perhaps the best year, because so much that needed to be done has been done, is being done, and in the process, we are coming back and coming back strong. Now, what does that have to do with you? And I've said it over and over again, and if you hear nothing more from me, I tell you this: wherever you go, and whether you come to Panama is of no importance to me, okay? It's important to you. You go to the right place for you. But if you want to go somewhere, we have the track record, folks, and nobody else in Latin America has it. And it's as simple as that. For security, for stability, for a growing economy, you want to be not just in a place where you can feel secure and safe. And here, we went through this entire process without any harm to people. There were no fighting in the streets. There was no killings that went on in places like Santiago and Bogota and other places. People were killed in riots and what have you. And there were fires and police stations were burned down and metro stations and bus stations and Lord knows in Santiago 2 churches were burned to the ground. I mean, for God's sakes, it was a mess. If you actually went into the details, even in the apparently quiet places, if you looked in carefully, you discovered there was a lot of stress going on. We had none of that here. We did not have, as far as I know, anybody even injured, much less killed, as a result of during this period of time. And we did not go around burning down anything or trashing property, private or public. I can imagine Panamanians setting fire to their metro stations. I wouldn't suggest trying it with any of them around. This is not who we are. Now, we have in the country people from other nations who are hot-headed, if you want to call it that, who are much more likely to respond in this manner. And they're not here. And we make that very clear if anything happens. We remind them very sharply, no, not here. And the results are impressive. So we've got that to offer you. Now, what can I say? To me, the most important thing is not whether you are doing well, although you're coming down into a buyer's market. It's not going to last forever, but it is here, no question. And you've got a chance to rent or sell, rent or buy for considerably less than you would have for several years now. So this is excellent time for you to come down. But even if that were not the case, you're not the ones I actually am most concerned with when it comes to where I live. I'm most concerned with the people of that nation. Are they feeling secure? Are they may be as politically driven as anybody right now on important issues to them, which is what they should be doing. This is democracy. I have no problem with democracy, okay? But they aren't turning it into a hellhole. Well, the people of Nicaragua who wrote me, members of Retirement Wave, and saying, how do we get out of here? They're firing guns in the streets. I mean, you want the people around you not just to be pretty to look at with their colorful costumes and their lovely little outdoor markets, et cetera, and so forth. You want them to feel as if they're raising their kids for better life, that they have the money they need to put food on the table, to get the education of their children, and to pay for it that their children need. But above all, they are family-oriented people. They want this to happen. And they have very strong feelings, just as Panamanians do, about their own internal situation. But like Panamanians, are often too polite or just too smart, from a commercial viewpoint, to talk about it with strangers, and not their style. But they actually are incredibly stressed. And if you can understand that, then you understand that when the time comes that the top blows off, who's there? Who's going to pay for everything? And they're not going to target expats. It's just that you're going to be caught in the middle of something you don't want to be in. I don't know how often this has to happen. But there were a lot of groups, I know these groups well, who kept pushing and pushing and pushing for Nicaragua. It's a great place for people to settle down, a buyer's market, all right. And I kept saying to people, there's a reason why they're so cheap. And people kept talking about a canal that's not being built and never going to be built in Nicaragua and stuff like this. I'm sick of it. I'm really sick and tired of it all. I always am trying to be so very careful. This is the right place for safety, for security, for, if you can survive it, a free enterprise economy that nonetheless takes care of its poor and does a better job of it than many countries who follow a different system. And we don't talk a lot about ourselves. We really are focused on what we do, and we really are a business country, and we're not in a competition with anybody else, and we're not frightened by anybody. No one's going to attack us. We're not going to attack them. We are who we are. And if you like that, and you can get into that spirit, and you can do something other than just live on the surface and only look at the things you want to look at, or the things you want to fear, or then you're going to be okay. In fact, you may be a lot better off. So that's what I wanted to say. This is the thing I wanted to get out, that I have never quite put it this strongly. I have more evidence than I need, and I am sick and tired of sitting here and saying, on the whole, blah, 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 blah. No, this is the good place. This is a very good place. And I know that anything can happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And it always has. It's always that way in the future. But as I often put it to people who write, if we have problems in the future, wherever you are now, it's going to be worse. And odds are that I'm right. And Panama's proven this time after time after time. And I hope they don't have to prove it again. I hope just leave it to us and we'll go ahead and grow. And everybody else is welcome to grow with us. We have no issue with them. We're not running a race with anybody else, except with ourselves and our own record. And we're trying to beat our own record, and we're going to do it. So thank you for putting up with that. I hope and pray for a very good year for everybody, a healthy year above all, and a good business year for everybody involved, so that you and I and everyone else who are concerned with making a living can do so in peace and with growth ahead. And then, we can sit down at the end of 2022 and look at 2023 and say, here we go again, let's do it again. All right. Thank you very much.